Back in we dive, last hour of the program. My name is Glenn Woods. Thanks for joining us. It is a Thursday. That means we head on down to talk to Wyoming Liberty Group, and Steve Klein has just slid into home plate and joined us. Good to see you again, Steve. We got a couple of things to talk about this time around, and the first one I was hoping for your legal expertise on, if you can give it to me. Yesterday, I got a surprise phone call from Cindy Hill, which I was looking at the news story, but I didn't say anything because I wanted more information. So if the Supreme Court decides that they're not going to rehear the case, and SF 106, if I have that right, goes down in flames, then why isn't she back in her office right now? And do we have a bit of a constitutional problem here with the governor or the legislator, who, by the way, just reconfirmed the director of schools in the state of Wyoming? Do we have a problem here?
Glenn, we certainly have a problem, and it's unfortunate that the legislature didn't act and is going to punt all the way down to a special session before the election. But the wheels of justice, unfortunately, move very slowly. There is a process, and it was only last Friday, February 28th, that the Supreme Court declined to rehear the Hill versus Wyoming case. And if you look at the original opinion, which is only about a month old, the end of the majority opinion right there, the very last sentence is, we remand to the district court for entry of an order consistent with this opinion. So what's been happening is after the Attorney General asked for a rehearing and the Supreme Court denied it, that's a process, and it's one of the few things about this case I predicted correctly, that they wouldn't, in fact, have a rehearing, and now they're going to have to move back to the district court. It's my suspicion that the AG will ask for a stay of relief to allow the legislature time to catch up. It's possible that they would deny that. What's very unlikely, however, and this is the linchpin, the thing you really have to consider, is that while SF 104, or Senate Enrolled Act 1 from last year, was overturned, that does not give the Supreme Court the power to hit a full reset button and say that the law that was previously existed before SF 104 is in fact the law again. That would turn the court, the judiciary, into the legislature. So there is a vacuum here, but it's not really a constitutional crisis. It's just the wheels of justice moving very slowly, and obviously with an election coming up, the governor and certain parties are really benefiting from this, from making it go as slow as possible, because the election will be, if Cindy Hill is running for governor, she will not be one way or the other, she will not be superintendent in January.
Well, and what was more, to me, this has never really been a Cindy Hill issue, and I've said that to her several times on the air, is it really is about me getting my vote back, because we have an election coming up here, and I want to know that if I vote for the guy who's in charge, or the superintendent of public instruction, I'm actually voting for the person who's going to be in charge of the schools. And at this point, it doesn't look like I'm going to get that.
I think that's very true, Glenn, and I think that's, again, it's an interesting session. I personally took some relief that it wasn't all education all the time, a lot of the issues I was working on, but I agree with you 100%. I think it's very strange to go into an election cycle, even after, let's assume that the special session happens in spring and they do try and iron this out. What if, because the rehearing declined to delve into the details of SF 104, which is a very comprehensive bill that reassigned dozens of duties of the superintendent to an appointed position, what happens if they try and do SF 104 light? Well, I imagine I wouldn't be surprised if Cindy Hill sued again. So the question is, I think they don't want to acknowledge this, but the way to avoid any kind of further litigation would have been to legislatively restore things. Of course, that would put Rich Crandall out of a job. That would probably mean a lot of different people at the Department of Ed, consultants, might suddenly find themselves out of a job. And now, frankly, Cindy Hill's not making this any less dramatic by announcing that 8 a.m. Monday she's going to be marching into the Hathaway building where the Department of Ed is located, and will be somehow reasserting herself as the head of the DOE.
Okay, I hadn't heard that she's basically just going to walk into the office and try to take her old desk back, huh?
Yes, she announced that at a press conference this morning. So I'll be live tweeting at my handle, Steve R. Klein. I think I might set up a lawn chair there in front of the Hathaway building. I imagine it will be quite a show come Monday.
I would like to be down there with you on that, so we can just sort of sit back and relax and just watch whatever happens. I wish I could make a road trip down there, but okay. So, in other words, we just have a lot of legal and legislative maneuvering left, and who knows what now. I guess that's where we're at. We don't even know what's going to happen next. Although this is going to be interesting to see when Cindy Hill tries to walk back into that office. Let's get on to another topic that you had sent me, because this one actually was of great interest to me. I had talked extensively, and you've written extensively about police officers being able to pull somebody over, and if they have a lot of cash on them, well, they can seize the cash. Someone could even get arrested, and you've warned about this in the state of Wyoming. Well, we're not dealing with an automobile. We're dealing with an airplane. What happened?
Well, Glenn, this goes back to the work I've been doing during the session. We had a few different bills considered, but ultimately we were working with House Bill 76, which was an attempt to reform this topic, civil asset forfeiture. A Controlled Substances Act here in Wyoming was a tool to fight the war on drugs going back to about 1971, and they wanted to give the police broad authority to seize narcotics and to try and kneecap drug traffickers by also seizing any property related to drugs. I think when these laws were passed at the federal and state level, the idea was that indeed there would be drugs involved, that when you find drugs and cash, well, take both of them. And I don't think many people have too many objections with that, because it's not too hard to establish in court that that's what this money is related to. You talk about fancy cars, you talk about boats. The entire TV show Miami Vice would never have been a concept if it wasn't for the whole idea of civil forfeiture. But over the years, nationwide, we've seen a lot of abuse of these things, and even here in Wyoming, we have large seizures going on of vehicles and cash when there's no drugs found. And sure enough, this bill, House Bill 76, would have upped the forfeiture standard here in Wyoming to a clear and convincing evidence. Right now, the police only need probable cause to take your property. That's called seizure, and then they have to go to court, and you have to show up and prove that the property is yours. They only have to show by a preponderance of the evidence, the lowest evidentiary standard in court, that this is related in some way to drug trafficking. Often that ends up just being testimony of police officers that they use as evidence, and then the judge gets to decide, and then you might lose your property. So now in Wyoming, I want to make it very clear that law enforcement was actually supportive of upping this evidentiary standard in the end, because they believe that they already are being very careful with this law. And in practice, I think it's certainly true that a lot of the instances I've found are very suspicious. And as you mentioned, and this is what happened on the day that this bill, it got through the House, no problem, and then it died in the Senate Judiciary Committee last Friday. And that very day, February 28th, up in Cody, the police executed a warrant and seized hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash from two gentlemen who were flying an airplane. And the story, I finally got a hold of the actual warrant that they used to get the affidavit that they used to get a search warrant to get these guys in a hotel room. And basically, you have a drug dog named Zeke who walked around their plane and smelled drugs, and then you had this long affidavit of a police officer listing all of these perfectly legal activities that he counted as suspicious. I'm not a criminal law expert, and I believe this is pretty standard fare for getting a warrant, but it's pretty scary that they're insisting that these guys are involved in the drug trade, and sure enough, after getting the warrant, they found all this cash. There are indications of some other illegal things, fake IDs, other things that look suspicious, like having 15 cell phones. But sure enough, they end up charging the guy with a misdemeanor for not having like a pilot's license, and they're still going to hold on to all the cash. And this is where it becomes, the downfalls of fighting a war on drugs. That I'm suspicious that these guys are in fact involved in the drug trade. You might even call that a reasonable suspicion. Do you call that probable cause to arrest them? And when you arrest them, you charge them with a bunk misdemeanor and just keep the money? It's easy to see how the suspicions of police can suddenly fall over into the area where we've seen in plenty of other states, where there's small business people be having their money seized for suspected tax evasion, where there's in Nebraska, our neighboring state, my favorite case that's just over a month old now, finally settled, an exotic dancer driving across the country with $1 million in cash that she'd saved up over a career of entertaining, as it were.
Must have been more than a dancer, I tell you.
And then she wanted to go buy a nightclub. She was going to go buy a partnership, and the cops said, "Oh heck no! This cash can't possibly be legally earned money." And they kept it. And she had to go to court and get it back. And when you have no strong system in place, I'm really, again, you don't want to be hard on law enforcement here. And again, in Wyoming, I think they've been very careful. But when the law is so easily abused, we have a serious problem. And I'm really excited that the Joint Judiciary Committee is going to be taking up this topic in the interim. So they'll be meeting in Rawlins in May, and then there's 2 other meetings until the next legislative session. And hopefully a committee bill will come out of this to implement at least the reform of House Bill 76, maybe some other reforms, and then we can go forward, and we can go from a state where we can say Wyoming is not abusing civil forfeiture. What we should be able to say is Wyoming cannot abuse civil forfeiture legally.
Okay, I'm talking with Steve Klein from Wyoming Liberty Group. As you're talking about this, I thought of a few things that kind of worried me. Over the years, besides radio, I've run some retail stores, and some of them were pretty good size, and it really was not uncommon for me to head to the bank with a deposit, which was just across town or not too far away, and I would be kind of nervous because I would have a real good pile of cash in my car. And I always just kind of wondered when I started hearing about police officers pulling people over on the highway, was something like this ever going to happen to me? Now, what interested me as you were talking about this is, so far you say the state police are in favor of changing this law or strengthening this law? Or
well, they're in favor of the evidentiary standard for forfeiture. They believe that they're only instigating cases where we could prove by clear and convincing evidence, which is just a step below proof beyond a reasonable doubt, that this property is in fact related to drug crimes. There's still a lot of problems with that. First of all, the seizure, you have to go to court and prove in a lot of cases with cash that perfectly legal property is in fact your own and not related to the drug trade. If in a lot of cases where there's people who are they may have cash on them, that doesn't make them rich, and if the police seize your cash and you have to go to court and prove it's yours, you don't have any money to pay for an attorney. And because this is a civil procedure, the state does not have to provide you with an attorney if you cannot afford one. There's also the big problem, and the police really want to be able to work with the federal government, and the federal law is where a lot of these bad things are happening with the IRS, as you mentioned, with small businesses. For example, under the Internal Revenue Code, you have to report deposits of more than $10,000. So when a business is operating on a cash basis and making regular deposits of, let's say, $8,000, $9,000, even though that's a standard accounting, that's the money that's coming in, the IRS might look at that, as they did in a recent case in Michigan, and say, oh, you're just trying to avoid the disclosure law. Let's take the money until we figure this out.
Well, okay, so let's say you go and fight in court and you win and you get your money back. Do you also get court costs and other such things back, or are you just left without? Because these cases... Okay, I'm talking with Steve Klein, Wyoming Liberty Group. Sorry about that. I was just asking you a question, and Google Plus went crash, but we're back, loaded up again. So the question I was asking you, first off, let me go to the 2 gentlemen who had that airplane over, and what'd you say that was, Cody?
That's in Cody, yeah.
Okay. So the drug-sniffing dog goes around the airplane and sniffs and says he finds something, but did they ever find any drugs?
No.
Okay. So then you fight in court, and let's say you actually win and you get your money back. What about all the court costs?
No, I mean, I think a lot of judges are starting to realize, especially in federal court, they're getting kind of feisty and angry about what's been going on. So in the Nebraska case, for example, that was in federal court, and the lady was able to get about $40,000 in attorney's fees. So she got her money back and didn't have to pay her lawyer. But that's atypical. Maybe that's increasing now, but often, and that's the problem. Like, let's say if the cops haven't seized your cash and you can afford an attorney, it might not be worth it to pay one to go and fight for this. So let's say it's $7,000. Well, if it costs you $5,000 in attorney's fees to get it back, what good is that? So
right. So let's say you finally do. Well, you decide you're just not going to fight it. It's not worth getting your money back, which to me, of course, I think you probably agree that's at that point we can just classify that as theft. But what do they do with the money? So now they're $7,000 richer. Where does it go?
In Wyoming, if it's done under our law, under the Controlled Substances Act, right now there's a 70-30 split between the police agency that was involved and the Attorney General's office. That's an agreement they came to in 2005. So a lot of what then is the money's then, and it's a budget item. They always assume they're going to bring in a certain amount of money using this tool every year. So that's basically it's not they're not spending it, thankfully, on a Gatorade or strippers, which has happened in some other states, thankfully, but they are using it to as part of their budget to pay for other policing.
Okay, so we have just a little bit of time left in the Wyoming session here, and besides camping out in a lawn chair with a tall tropical drink to watch Cindy Hill try to retake her office by storm, what else will you be doing in the next, what is it, a week left here? How long do we have left?
Glenn, it's likely they're going to wrap today. The governor has signed the budget yesterday with, I believe, 10 line item vetoes. They were going through that today, so it looks like they're going to wrap up today, and everyone's going to go on home.
But what about the special session? Because it looks like, I think that's coming. We're going to have a special session. What happens then? When does that happen?
Well, I suspect it's going to be called in the spring at some point. I really have no idea. In the meantime, in the interim, I'm working on some other issues that came up during this session. I'm certainly, the more research I do, the more concerned I become with drone use. We have again, this is an area that's really developing, especially among law enforcement. I think we need to have some guidelines, some privacy concerns need to be addressed, and just basically assure that we're not going to be using drones for constant surveillance over Wyoming towns and the countryside. Right now that's not necessarily a huge threat. Drones are pretty expensive, especially the really advanced ones, but they're getting more advanced all the time and cheaper all the time. And so that's an area I'm really going to look into. And by the way, the federal government, the FAA, has just not done a very good job. They're kind of just issuing permits left and right to people, organizations that want to use drones. And I think we need to be kind of cognizant about that. So I'm really diving into that. In addition to civil forfeiture, got some free speech work going, and I'm sure plenty of other things are going to pop up between now and next year's full session, which will be the full 40 days.
Well, I took your drone story and read it on the air and talked about it, and of course I had to go to the movie Apocalypse Now and play the whole the audio of the helicopter attack on the beach as a lead-in to your story there, which I think is a perfect. It sounded great because they've already got the chopper sound effects in the background, the music, all of that. So, okay, when we talk about drones in the state of Wyoming, does the state currently own any right now?
We've got some federal agencies using them here. We have smaller ones being used by some municipal governments, at least. I don't believe law enforcement has them right now. They may be borrowing them occasionally, and I think when they do, it's usually for search and rescue.
Yeah.
And again, that's fine. I think, and again, it even appeared that a lot of law enforcement was supportive of House Bill 105, which was considered another one of these ones. But this one died on the House side for lack of time, like so many poor bills this year. But they're happy with it. But I'm going to look into it some more. And also, data retention is a big one too. That are we going to be flying these around and just having months and months of tracking available, that if they want to go analyze these cameras, they can go and do that. So there's a lot of issues, and I just kind of want to at least start chipping away at them before, as I said in my blog post, before RoboCop knocks on our door.
Well, and I was actually kind of curious when I take a look at drones in Wyoming, and as you said, some of them are lightweight. I take a look at the winds that we have out here, and I think, how do you fly one of those and keep them in the air when the wind is mostly would probably blow them upside down? But okay, well, also what you're pushing for, we've got about 30 seconds left, is to make sure that they would have a warrant before they flew over anybody's property. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's a very good move for these kind of, and again, there's going to have to be a lot of discussion about the types of drones that are going to be used, what kind of a lot of the technology is already protected by the Fourth Amendment, infrared listening devices, things like that. But I don't think it's fair to compare a drone to a plane and just being able to fly it over. And certainly, again, just don't keep it up in the air all day watching all of us and like a shepherd.
Right. All right, Steve, good to see you again. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks a lot, Glenn.